The landing craft rocked under my feet. I wiped sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand and checked my rifle again. May 1943, and the Pacific was a furnace. 8 other guys crouched around me, all of us packed in tight, nobody talking much. Leo caught my eye from across the boat and gave me a nod. I'd known Leo Hernandez since basic. Good guy. Solid. Lieutenant Fields stood at the front hanging onto a rail with one hand, map in the other. He had to raise his voice over the engine. Intelligence says minimal resistance on this one, he said. Small Japanese outpost, probably understaffed. We secure the island, set up communications, wait for the second wave tomorrow. Clean and simple. Someone behind me laughed. It wasn't me. Nothing felt clean and simple anymore. The boat hit something and lurched. My stomach dropped. 30 seconds! The coxswain shouted. I tightened my helmet strap and glanced at Leo again. His face had gone blank the way it always did before action. I took a deep breath and tried to do the same. The front ramp dropped with a splash, and Lieutenant Fields was already moving. Go! 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 I jumped into knee-deep water that soaked through my boots and pants. Cold shock against the heat. I pushed forward, rifle up, eyes scanning the tree line. The beach wasn't wide, maybe 50 yards of sand before the jungle started. I waited for gunfire, for someone to drop, for the familiar chaos. Nothing came. We fanned out across the beach in practiced formation. Sand crunched under my boots as I moved up to my position. The silence felt wrong. I'd been in enough landings to know there should be noise, gunfire, shouting, something. But there was just the sound of waves and our own movement. Clear right, someone called. Clear left, came another voice. I kept my eyes on the trees, waiting for muzzle flashes that never appeared. The jungle wall stood dark and still ahead of us. Lieutenant Fields signalled and we converged near a cluster of rocks. Sergeant Holmes started organising a perimeter while Fields unfolded his map again. No welcome party, Leo said, dropping down beside me. That's new. Yeah, I scanned the tree line again. You'd think they'd at least send a postcard. Fields finished with the map and gathered us around. We need to locate that outpost. Intelligence put it on the North Ridge. He pointed toward a rise about half a mile inland. Harper Hernandez, you're with me. We'll scout ahead. The rest of you secure the landing area and prepare for the supply boats. Leo and I exchanged glances. Scouting wasn't my favourite assignment, but better than sitting on the beach waiting for something to happen. We headed into the jungle in a loose triangle. Fields in front, Leo and me flanking. The air changed as soon as we passed the tree line. Hotter, thicker, hard to breathe. The canopy blocked most of the sunlight, leaving everything in greenish shadow. I'd been in jungle before on other islands. There was always noise. Birds, insects, stuff rustling in the undergrowth. This place was different. Quiet in a way that made the hair on my neck stand up. "Where are the birds?" Leo whispered after we'd been walking about 10 minutes. I hadn't noticed until he said it, but he was right. No birds, no buzzing insects. Just the sound of our own breathing and boots on the damp ground. "Focus," Fields said, but I could tell it was getting to him too. His eyes kept darting around, searching the trees. The ground started sloping upward. We were climbing the ridge. Sweat poured down my back and my uniform stuck to my skin. Every few steps I'd check our flanks, expecting something, anything, to move. Leo stopped suddenly and crouched down. "Sir," he whispered to Fields, "intelligence said there'd be an outpost up here, right?" Fields nodded, wiping sweat from his face. "Should be just ahead. Concrete bunker, small garrison. Why?" "Because we should have hit their patrol routes by now," Leo said. "Or tripped some kind of alarm. Something's not right." Fields didn't answer, just signalled us to keep moving. Slower now, more careful with our steps. We found the bunker 20 minutes later. It sat in a small clearing half buried in the hillside. Concrete walls, one door hanging open, no guards, no movement. "Cover me," Fields said, and moved forward in a crouch. Leo and I spread out, rifles ready, watching the tree line and the bunker entrance. Fields reached the open door and pressed himself against the wall beside it. He waited, listened, then looked back at us and shook his head. No sound from inside. We moved up to join him. The three of us stacked up beside the door and Fields gave the signal. We swung in, rifles up, ready for anything. Except what we found. The inside of the bunker looked like something had torn through it. Tables overturned, equipment smashed, papers scattered everywhere, and blood, dark, dried blood, splashed across the walls and floor. "Jesus!" Leo whispered. I moved carefully through the space, stepping over broken radio parts and shattered chairs. The blood patterns didn't make sense. It was like someone had painted with it, sweeping arcs and spatters that couldn't come from gunshot wounds or normal fighting. "No bodies," Field said, checking another room. "No signs of burial either." "They didn't leave," Leo said, pointing to a row of packs against one wall untouched. "Their gear's still here." I stopped in the centre of the main room, where a metal table had been flipped onto its side. Something on the far wall caught my eye, marks that looked deliberate, not like the random splashes elsewhere. I stepped closer and my whole body went cold. Words. Someone had written words on the concrete in dried brown blood. Finger-painted them in large, jagged letters. "She comes from the sea." I couldn't move. Couldn't take my eyes off those words. Something about them felt wrong, like they didn't belong in the world. "Lieutenant," I finally managed, "you should see this." Fields came over, Leo right behind him. They both went quiet, staring at the message. "What the hell does that mean?" Leo asked. Fields didn't answer. He was already moving to another room. "There's more in here." We followed him. The second room had been some kind of sleeping quarters, more blood, more destruction, and on the far wall the same message written again, "She comes from the sea." We found it in the third room too, and scratched into the concrete floor of what looked like a supply closet. "No bodies," Field said again, like he was trying to make sense of it. "No shell casings, no signs of who did this." We searched the entire bunker. No remains. Not even a finger or scrap of uniform. Just blood and those words, over and over. The sun was getting low by the time we finished. Fields called it in on the radio, requesting instructions. We were told to return to the beach and continue with the mission as planned. Second wave would still arrive tomorrow. Higher-ups probably figured it was some kind of psychological warfare tactic. We walked back mostly in silence. The jungle felt different now. Not just quiet, but watchful. Like something was paying attention to us passing through. When we reached the edge of the trees, the beach lay spread out below us, golden in the late afternoon light. Our guys had set up a perimeter, dug in positions. Everything looked normal, orderly, military, but I couldn't shake what we'd seen. Those words kept repeating in my head. "She comes from the sea." I looked out at the water, at waves gently rolling onto the shore, and for the first time they seemed threatening somehow. As we made our way down to rejoin the others, I knew something about this island was deeply wrong. Not just the missing Japanese soldiers or the blood-painted bunker. Something underneath all that. Something I couldn't name yet. The island itself felt unnatural. Like it wasn't meant for us to be here. We set up camp near the beach as it got dark. Nothing fancy, just standard procedure. Fields had us working in teams, digging shallow foxholes and setting up a perimeter. Nobody talked much after what we'd found at that bunker. I helped Medina stack supplies while Holmes organised the watch rotation. The sky turned this deep purple colour as the sun went down. That's when I noticed Moore kneeling by the radio equipment, smacking the side of it and muttering. "Everything good?" I asked, walking over. Moore looked up, frustrated. "Can't get a clear signal. Been trying to check in with command for 20 minutes. He twisted some dials which just produced more static. Something's blocking us. Atmospheric interference, maybe. You sure it's not just the equipment?" I'd seen plenty of radios fail in training. "Checked everything twice," he said, connecting different wires. "It's like there's something in the air scrambling the frequencies. We're on our own until I figure this out." Fields came over, looking at the radio. "Keep working on it. I want hourly attempts to establish contact." "Yes, sir," Moore said, but I could tell he wasn't hopeful. Night came fast. The jungle behind us turned pitch black while the ocean stayed this weird, silvery colour from the moon. Fields assigned watch rotations, and I got first shift with Leo. We took positions about 30 yards apart, facing the water with our backs to camp. It was quiet for about an hour, just the waves coming in and out, hitting the shore in that steady rhythm. Every now and then I'd glance over at Leo's silhouette. He was sitting completely still, rifle across his lap. I pulled out my own flashlight and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a tunnel that extended farther than the light reached. "I'll go first," I said, stepping past him into the cave. The temperature dropped immediately. After the jungle heat, it felt almost cold. Our footsteps echoed slightly as we moved deeper. "You notice something weird about these walls?" I asked, running my hand along the surface. Leo directed his light where I was touching. "They're smooth." "Too smooth," I agreed. The rock walls weren't rough like a natural cave. They were polished, almost like marble. "This doesn't look natural." "Maybe the Japanese did some excavation," Leo suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. We continued forward about 50 feet until the tunnel widened. Our flashlight beams couldn't reach the ceiling anymore. We'd entered some kind of chamber. "This place is huge," Leo whispered, his voice still echoing slightly. I swept my light across the floor, then up the far wall and froze. There, positioned against the back of the chamber, stood a statue. Around midnight, Marshall and Hill relieved us. I crawled into my foxhole but couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about what Leo said. I must have dozed off eventually because I woke up to Fields kicking my boot. "You'll watch again in 20, he said. I sat up, rubbing my face. The sky was still dark, but with that greyish tint that comes before dawn. I grabbed my canteen and walked down to where Leo was sitting by a small fire. "Get any sleep?" I asked. He shook his head. "Kept hearing them." I didn't ask who, just sat down next to him and poured some coffee from the pot balanced on the rocks. My second watch was harder. The ocean seemed different somehow. The waves had this rhythm that didn't seem natural. They'd come in sets of 3, then pause, then 3 more. After an hour of listening, I started hearing patterns in the sound. Not exactly words, but something close, something that reminded me of speech. I caught myself leaning forward, trying to understand. Had to force myself to look away from the water. By the time the sky lightened, I was convinced Leo hadn't been imagining things. There was something wrong with the way the ocean sounded. When the sun finally came up, Fields called everyone together for morning assignments. That's when Medina noticed the footprints. "Sir," he called out, pointing toward the shoreline. "Those weren't there last night." We all looked where he was pointing. A line of footprints led from the water's edge straight toward our camp, then back to the ocean again. They passed right between 2 of our guard positions. "Who took a midnight swim?" Fields asked, looking around at us. Nobody answered. The footprints were bare, smaller than any of ours would be, and they were spaced weird, too far apart like whoever made them had been taking huge strides. Holmes knelt down to examine them. "These aren't ours, Lieutenant." Fields stared at the tracks for a long minute. "All right, change of plans. We're going to explore this island properly before the second wave arrives. Pairs, standard recon pattern." He pulled out his map and started assigning areas. "Harper, Hernandez, you take the eastern section. Check the coastline and work your way inland. I want to know if there's anyone else on this island." Leo nodded, but I could see tension in his jaw. We grabbed extra ammo and water, then headed out along the beach. The eastern part of the island was mostly thick jungle with these rocky outcroppings near the shore. We pushed through vegetation so dense it was like walking through a wall sometimes. The heat built up fast, and by mid-morning my uniform was soaked through with sweat. "This place feels wrong," Leo said as we climbed over a fallen tree. I knew what he meant. The jungle would be full of noise, birds, insects, whatever, and then suddenly go completely silent when we walked through. Like everything was holding its breath. Then the sounds would start again behind us. "You still hearing those whispers?" I asked. Leo nodded. "You hear them too now, don't you?" I didn't answer, but yeah, I did. Even away from the beach, I could somehow still hear that rhythm, that almost speech pattern that wasn't quite words. It was following us. We spent hours searching but found nothing. No buildings, no people, not even animals bigger than lizards. Just dense jungle and that weird silence that kept tracking us. I couldn't stop looking back toward the ocean. Couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. The whole island felt like it was waiting for something to happen. "What do you think happened to the Japanese?" Leo asked as we took a water break on a rocky ledge. "In that bunker?" I wiped sweat from my face. "I don't know, but I keep thinking about that message." "She comes from the sea," Leo said quietly. I nodded, scanning the trees around us. "Yeah, and I can't help wondering what else this island is hiding." The whispers seemed to get louder then, like they were answering my question, but I still couldn't make out the words. Leo and I kept moving along the eastern shoreline. We'd been walking for about 2 hours, checking every spot that looked suspicious. The jungle pressed right up to the water in most places, but occasionally the beach widened enough to walk comfortably. "This is pointless," Leo said, wiping sweat from his face. "If there was anyone else on this island, we'd have seen some sign by now." We rounded a rocky outcropping where the beach narrowed to almost nothing. I had to press against the stone to avoid getting my boots wet. That's when I noticed it, a dark opening in the rock face, partially hidden by hanging vines. "Leo," I called, pointing, "look at that." He turned and squinted. "A cave." Yeah, wasn't on any of the maps Field showed us. Leo moved closer, pushing aside the vines with his rifle barrel. The opening was about 6 feet tall, wide enough for a person to walk through comfortably. "Should we check it out?" he asked. I hesitated. "We're supposed to report anything unusual." "This definitely counts as unusual," Leo said. He was already reaching for his flashlight. I pulled out my own flashlight and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a tunnel that extended farther than the light reached. "I'll go first," I said, stepping past him into the cave. The temperature dropped immediately. After the jungle heat, it felt almost cold. Our footsteps echoed slightly as we moved deeper. "You notice something weird about these walls?" I asked, running my hand along the surface. Leo directed his light where I was touching. "They're smooth." "Too smooth," I agreed. The rock walls weren't rough like a natural cave. They were polished, almost like marble. "This doesn't look natural." "Maybe the Japanese did some excavation," Leo suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. We continued forward about 50 feet until the tunnel widened. Our flashlight beams couldn't reach the ceiling anymore. We'd entered some kind of chamber. "This place is huge," Leo whispered, his voice still echoing slightly. I swept my light across the floor, then up the far wall and froze. There, positioned against the back of the chamber, stood a statue. "Leo," I said, my voice sounding strange in my own ears. He had already seen it. We both aimed our flashlights at the figure. It was about 7 feet tall, carved from some dark stone that didn't match the walls. It depicted a woman, sort of. She had a woman's basic shape, but her skin was covered in what looked like scales. Her face was wrong. Too long, too thin, with features that weren't quite human. Her eyes were the worst part, large, vacant hollows that somehow seemed to follow us as we moved closer. "What the hell is this?" I muttered. Leo approached it, seemingly less bothered than I was. "Look at this craftsmanship. This isn't military, this is old, really old." I stayed back, keeping my light on the statue. Something about it made my skin crawl. The way it was positioned, facing the entrance like it was waiting for visitors. The way those empty eye sockets seemed to track me. Leo crouched at the base of the statue, examining something. "There's writing here, symbols of some kind." He traced them with his fingers. "Don't touch it," I said sharply. He looked up, surprised. "What?" "Just don't." I couldn't explain the feeling I had. "We should tell Fields about this." Leo stood up, brushing dust from his hands. "Yeah, you're right. This is definitely not Japanese. These symbols don't look like any language I've seen." He took a step back from the statue. "It's ancient, though. Has to be hundreds of years old at least." I was already backing toward the entrance. "Let's go." "What's the rush?" Leo asked, but he followed me. "I don't like this place." That was an understatement. Something about the statue made me deeply uneasy. The scaled skin, that inhuman face, those eyes. We walked back through the tunnel faster than we'd entered. I kept glancing back, half expecting to see the statue following us. When we finally emerged into the sunlight, I took a deep breath. Leo looked at me strangely. "You okay?" "Yeah, just didn't expect to find something like that here." I checked my watch. "We should head back and report this." We made good time returning to camp, arriving just before sunset. Fields was talking with Sergeant Holmes near the supply area. They both looked up as we approached. "Find anything interesting?" Fields asked. I nodded. "Yes, sir. We found a cave on the eastern shore with some kind of chamber inside. There's a statue there, not Japanese. Looks much older." Holmes raised his eyebrows. "A statue? Of what?" "A woman," Leo answered. "But not exactly human. Had scales and a strange face. There were symbols carved into the base." Fields frowned. "Native artwork, maybe. This island might have been inhabited before." "Sir," Holmes interrupted, "that might connect with what we found." He reached into his pocket and pulled out several folded papers. We went through more of the Japanese documents from the bunker. Most of it is standard reports, but there's this. He handed the papers to Fields, who scanned them quickly. "What do they say?" I asked. Fields looked up. "It's not all translated, but there are references to something in the water and the Ancient One awakening. The last entries get pretty frantic." "That matches the message we found on the wall," Leo said. "She comes from the sea." A chill ran down my spine despite the evening heat. "We'll include this in tomorrow's report when communications are back up," Fields decided. "For now, get some food and rest. Second wave arrives tomorrow if all goes according to schedule." We all nodded and dispersed. Moore was still hunched over the radio, trying different frequencies. The sun was setting fast, turning the ocean a deep red. Medina had heated up some rations and we gathered around to eat. I wasn't particularly hungry, but I knew I needed to eat. Leo sat beside me but hardly touched his food. He kept staring out at the water. "You should eat something," I told him. He didn't respond at first, just kept looking at the ocean. His face had that same blank expression I'd seen when we'd landed. "Leo," I said, louder this time. He blinked and turned to me. "What?" "Your food. You haven't touched it." He looked down at his plate like he was surprised to see it there. "Not hungry?" "What were you looking at?" I asked, though I already had a feeling I knew. Leo's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "She's out there, the lady from the sea." He turned back to the water. "She's calling my name." I put my hand on his shoulder. "Leo, there's nothing out there. You don't hear it." His eyes never left the water. "Listen harder." I didn't want to, but I found myself looking out at the waves anyway. The strange 3-beat pattern was still there. 3 waves, pause, 3 waves, pause. Like someone tapping out a message. "Let's get some sleep," I said, standing up, "so we've had a long day." Leo nodded, but didn't move. I left him there and went to my foxhole. I lay down, trying to force myself to sleep, but my mind kept returning to that statue. Those hollow eyes, the scales, the elongated face that wasn't quite right. The sound of the ocean filled the night. I tried to ignore it, but the pattern was impossible to miss now that I'd noticed it. 3 waves, pause, 3 waves, pause. I turned onto my side, then my back, then my other side. And then I heard it. Beneath the rhythm of the waves, a voice, faint at first, then clearer. "Matthew." I sat up, heart pounding. The voice came again, riding on the waves. "Matthew." It was my name. The ocean was calling my name. I woke up to voices. Someone was talking about drowning. I blinked a few times, trying to shake off the heavy feeling of not enough sleep. The sun was just coming up, painting everything in that weird grey light. "It felt so real," Dina was saying. He sat on a supply crate, hands wrapped around a metal cup of coffee. His face looked pale. These cold hands just grabbed my ankles and pulled. I couldn't breathe. "Wait, you had that dream too?" Marshall asked. He'd stopped cleaning his rifle and was staring at Medina. "I had the exact same thing. Something dragged me down into the water." I sat up in my foxhole, not saying anything yet, just listening. Moore walked over from the radio station, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "You guys talking about drowning dreams?" he asked. "Because I had one too. Something with these cold, slippery hands pulled me under." I woke up gasping. I climbed out of my hole and stretched my back. "You all had the same dream?" They nodded. Marshall looked at me. "You too?" "No," I said. "Just regular bad sleep." I glanced around the camp looking for Leo. He wasn't in his foxhole. I spotted him down by the water's edge, just sitting there staring out at the waves. He'd been doing that a lot. "How long's he been down there?" I asked, nodding toward Leo. Moore shrugged. "Since before I woke up. At least an hour." I grabbed some coffee and walked over to where Sergeant Holmes was checking supplies. "Morning," he said, not looking up from his clipboard. "Sleep okay?" "Fine," I lied. But Medina, Marshall and Moore all had the same nightmare about drowning, something pulling them underwater. Holmes finally looked up. "Huh, that's weird. Must be this place getting to everyone." He glanced over at Leo. "Your buddy's been acting strange." "Yeah, I noticed." Holmes went back to his inventory, and I decided to check on Leo. I walked down to the water where he sat cross-legged on the sand, just staring at the ocean. He didn't turn when I approached. "Hey," I said, sitting down next to him. "You okay?" Leo didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed fixed on the water. After a few seconds, he turned to look at me, and I noticed something different about him. His eyes seemed distant, like he was looking through me rather than at me. They've always been here, he said quietly. Who has? Oh, those who came before. The ones who built the statue. He turned back to the ocean. There's truth beneath the waves. She's trying to show us. I set my coffee down. Leo, you're not making any sense. Did you sleep at all last night? He ignored my question. Can't you hear them? The voices in the water? I think we need to get you some rest, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Come on, let's go back to camp. Leo shook his head. You'll understand soon. I left him there and walked straight to Lieutenant Fields, who was studying maps spread out on a makeshift table. Sir, I need to talk to you about something. Fields looked up. What is it, Harper? It's about the men, sir. 3 of them had identical nightmares about drowning. And Leo? Something's wrong with him. He's been staring at the ocean for hours, talking nonsense about those who came before and truth beneath the waves. Fields folded his map and frowned. The statue you found yesterday could be playing on everyone's minds. Maybe, sir, but this feels different. Fields thought for a moment. All right. No one swims until further notice, and I want double watches tonight, especially facing the water. He looked past me toward Leo. Keep an eye on Hernandez. If he gets worse, let me know immediately. Yes, sir. The rest of the day passed slowly. Leo eventually came back to camp but barely spoke to anyone. He just sat cleaning his rifle over and over, sometimes mumbling to himself. I tried talking to him a couple times, but he just nodded and gave one-word answers. Night fell, and the camp quieted down. I took first watch with Marshall. We positioned ourselves about 20 yards apart, both facing the water. The waves kept coming in that strange pattern I'd noticed before. 3 waves, pause, 3 waves, pause. The sound was almost hypnotic. Around midnight, Holmes and Medina relieved us. I headed to my foxhole but couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Leo and the dreams the others had shared. After tossing and turning for about an hour, I got up to take a leak. That's when I saw them, wet footprints in the sand between our camp and the shore. They hadn't been there earlier. I crouched down to look closer. They weren't like the ones we'd found yesterday. These were different. Not quite human, but not animal either. The shape was all wrong. Too narrow in the middle, spread wide at what should be toes, and they were spaced weirdly, like whatever made them had a strange gait. I followed the tracks with my eyes. They led from the water to our camp and then back to the ocean again. I looked over at the guards, but they were focused outward, toward the jungle on the other side. A movement caught my eye. Someone was walking away from camp, heading east along the beach. It was Leo. He was moving quietly, hunched over, clearly trying not to be seen. I hesitated, then decided to follow him. I kept my distance, staying in the shadows of the jungle edge. Leo moved with purpose, like he knew exactly where he was going. After about 15 minutes, I realized he was heading for the cave we'd found yesterday. When Leo reached the cave entrance, he paused and looked around. I froze, pressing myself against a tree trunk. He didn't see me and disappeared inside. I waited a few minutes, then crept forward. The cave opening was dark, but I could see a faint light from deeper inside. I moved quietly through the entrance and down the tunnel, staying close to the wall. The light got brighter as I approached the chamber with the statue. I stopped just before the opening and peered around the corner. Leo had set up a small lamp at the base of the statue. He was kneeling in front of it, head bowed. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Leo was speaking, but not in English or any language I recognized. The sounds were fluid and gurgling, almost like water flowing over rocks. His voice rose and fell in a rhythmic pattern that matched the waves outside. He raised his hands toward the statue's face, still making those strange sounds. I watched for maybe 5 minutes before Leo finally stood up. He extinguished the lamp and headed back toward the entrance. I quickly backed up and slipped out of the cave, hurrying back to camp ahead of him. I got back to my foxhole and slid in, pretending to be asleep. About 10 minutes later, I heard Leo return. Through barely open eyes, I watched Leo make his way back to his sleeping bag. He moved differently now, more fluid, like his joints worked in new ways. He settled down about 10 feet from me, lying on his back and staring up at the stars. After a few minutes, he turned his head toward me. I kept my breathing slow and steady, like I was deep asleep. But I could see his face in the moonlight, and something was wrong. His eyes looked different, darker somehow, with this weird sheen to them, almost like the surface of water reflecting moonlight. They didn't look like Leo's eyes anymore. He stared at me for what felt like forever before finally turning away. I stayed completely still, my heart hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. Whatever had happened in that cave, whatever Leo had done with that statue, it had changed him, and for the first time since I'd known him, I was afraid of my friend. I jerked awake in the dark. Something felt off. The air was too quiet. I rolled over and saw Leo's empty sleeping bag next to me, just flat and cold. "Leo," I whispered. No answer. I checked my watch. 4:17 a.m., still a couple of hours before dawn. Leo should have been there, sleeping like everyone else. I sat up and looked around our camp. Most guys were out cold in their foxholes. Hill was on watch, standing at the edge of our perimeter. I pulled on my boots and walked over to him. "Hey, you seen Hernandez?" Hill nodded toward the beach. "Yeah, about 20 minutes ago. He was walking that way." He pointed to the shoreline. Didn't say anything when I called to him. Figured he needed to take a leak. Something cold settled in my stomach. 20 minutes to take a piss? Hill shrugged. Didn't think about it like that. I started walking toward the beach, then broke into a jog. "Wake the others," I called back. The moon was bright enough to see by. I scanned the shoreline as I ran, looking for any sign of Leo. The waves were doing that weird 3-beat pattern again. Crash, crash, crash. Silence. Crash, crash, crash. Silence. Then I saw him. Leo stood in the water. It was up to his waist already. His back was to the beach, facing out toward the dark ocean. Even from a distance, something looked wrong about how he was standing. Too still, too straight. "Leo," I shouted, running faster. "Leo, get out of there!" He turned and my steps faltered. He was smiling. Not his normal smile, not the one I knew from basic training or the jokes we shared in the mess. This smile was too wide, too fixed. His eyes caught the moonlight and reflected it back all wrong. "What the hell are you doing?" I yelled, reaching the water's edge. "Get back here now!" Leo just kept smiling. "It's beautiful, Matt," he said, voice flat. "She's waiting for us." Behind me, I heard the others running down to the beach. Fields was barking orders. Someone had a flashlight. "Leo, come on, man." I stepped into the water, shoes and all. "This isn't right. You're not thinking straight." But Leo just shook his head, still with that horrible smile. Then he turned away from me and started walking deeper into the water. "Leo, stop." He didn't. The water reached his chest, then his shoulders, then his neck. I didn't think. I just moved. I yanked off my helmet, dropped my rifle on the sand, kicked off my boots. I heard Sergeant Holmes shouting something behind me, but I was already splashing into the water. Leo's head disappeared under the surface. "Jesus Christ!" someone yelled from the shore. I dove forward into a wave and started swimming. The water was colder than I expected. Salt stung my eyes as I peered ahead, trying to spot Leo in the darkness. I reached the spot where I'd last seen him and took a deep breath, then dove down. And that's when everything stopped making sense. The water was clear. Not murky like it should have been at night. Clear like glass. And deep. Way deeper than it should have been this close to shore. I could see down, down, down into darkness that seemed to go on forever. But it wasn't empty darkness. There were shapes moving below, massive shadows shifting against each other. Not sharks, not whales, nothing that made any kind of sense. They had angles that hurt to look at, corners that bent in ways that corners shouldn't bend, parts that disappeared and reappeared like they were moving through dimensions I couldn't see. And floating among them was Leo. He hung suspended in the water about 20 feet down, arms stretched out like he was being crucified. His eyes were open, but they weren't eyes anymore, just black pools that seemed to swallow the light. His mouth moved, but no bubbles came out. I swam toward him, lungs already burning. As I got closer, I heard his voice. Not through my ears, but directly in my head. "They were here before us, Matt. Before everything." I reached for him, but he seemed to drift just beyond my fingertips. "They're coming back soon. The water is their door, she is their herald." My lungs screamed for air. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision. I kicked harder, trying to grab Leo's arm, his shirt, anything. "You'll see. Everyone will see." Something grabbed me from behind. Strong hands wrapped around my chest, yanking me upward. I fought against them, trying to break free and get back to Leo. I couldn't leave him down there with those things. I kicked and thrashed as we shot toward the surface. We broke through into the air. I gasped and choked, still fighting. "Leo!" I sputtered between breaths. "He's still down there. Let me go." It was Sergeant Holmes and Hill dragging me back to shore. I fought them the whole way, but I was weak from lack of oxygen and the cold water. They pulled me onto the sand where I collapsed, coughing up seawater. "Let me go back," I gasped, trying to stand. "He's down there. We can still get him." Holmes shoved me back down. "You're not going anywhere, Harper." "He's right there," I shouted, pointing at the water, just under the surface. Fields kneeled next to me, grabbing my shoulders. His face was tight with anger and fear. "What the hell happened out there? What did you see?" I tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come right. How do you describe shapes that don't make sense? Things your eyes can see, but your brain can't process. "There's something down there," I said, shivering. "Big things, moving. And Leo, his eyes. They weren't his eyes anymore. He spoke to me, but his mouth didn't move. Said they were here before us. Said they're coming back." Fields and Holmes exchanged looks. "The water was clear," I insisted. "Clear as day, even though it's night. You could see all the way down. There's something down there, something big." "Calm down, Harper," Fields said. "You're not making sense." But I couldn't calm down. Not with what I'd seen. Not with Leo still down there with those things. "We have to go after him," I said, trying again to get up. "We can't just leave him." Holmes and Hill held me down. I struggled against them, watching the water where Leo had disappeared. The waves kept coming in sets of 3. Crash, 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 like they were counting down to something. I sat by the campfire, hugging my knees to my chest. My clothes were still damp from the ocean, and I couldn't stop shivering. Not just from the cold. Lieutenant Fields stood in front of us, his face lit orange by the flames. The shadows made the lines around his eyes deeper. "All right, men, we need to face facts," he said. "We've lost Private Hernandez, the radio's still down, and the second wave that was supposed to arrive today hasn't shown up." No one spoke. Moore stared at his boots. Hill picked at something on his rifle. "Command doesn't know our situation," Fields continued, "and we don't know when they'll figure out something's wrong." Fields nodded at me. "Tell them." I looked around at the circle of faces, some curious, some doubtful. Medina leaned forward. "I believe him." Everyone turned to look at him. "That statue we found in the cave," Medina said. "It wasn't right. And those symbols, they match the ones in the documents we found." Marshall nodded. "I saw it too. That thing wasn't made by the Japanese. It's way older." "That doesn't mean there are monsters in the water," Holmes said. "Then where's Leo?" I asked. "And what about those footprints? And why are we all having the same dreams?" Fields raised his hand to quiet us. "We stick together. No one goes near the water alone, and we maintain a watch at all times. That's all we can do until help arrives." The meeting broke up. Some guys went to their foxholes, others stayed by the fire. I didn't feel like sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those shapes moving beneath the surface. Night fell completely. The moon was bright enough to see by, casting everything in silver. I sat on a rock, rifle across my knees, staring at the ocean. The waves kept their weird 3-beat rhythm. Slap, slap, slap. Pause. Slap, slap, slap. Pause. Then I noticed something new. The sound was changing. What started as whispers riding on the waves had turned into splashing. Rhythmic, deliberate splashing, like something moving through shallow water. I stood up, squinting at the shoreline. The moonlight reflected off the water, making it hard to see clearly. Then I saw them. Shapes, dragging themselves from the ocean onto the beach. "Hey," I called over my shoulder, not too loud. "Hey, someone else seeing this?" "Oh, those who came before? The ones who built the statue?" He turned back to the ocean. "There's truth beneath the waves. She's trying to show us." I set my coffee down. "Leo, you're not making any sense. Did you sleep at all last night?" He ignored my question. "Can't you hear them? The voices in the water?" "I think we need to get you some rest," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Come on, let's go back to camp." Leo shook his head. "You'll understand soon." I left him there and walked straight to Lieutenant Fields, who was studying maps spread out on a makeshift table. "Sir, I need to talk to you about something." Fields looked up. "What is it, Harper?" "It's about the men, sir. 3 of them had identical nightmares about drowning. And Leo? Something's wrong with him. He's been staring at the ocean for hours, talking nonsense about those who came before and truth beneath the waves. Fields folded his map and frowned. The statue you found yesterday could be playing on everyone's minds. Not human how? Holmes demanded. Fish people, I said. Like that statue. Fields scanned the water, then made a quick decision. We're moving to higher ground, the bunker on the ridge. Now, grab essential supplies only. We moved fast, stuffing canteens and ammo into packs. The radio equipment was too heavy, so Moore just grabbed the handset and batteries. No one wanted to be left behind. 5 minutes, Fields ordered, then we move out. I was shoving ration packs into my bag when I heard a strange noise behind me. I turned to see Marshall standing still, his head tilted like he was listening to something. Marshall, I said, you okay? He didn't respond. His eyes had gone glassy. Then, without warning, he dropped his pack and started walking toward the water. His movements were stiff, mechanical. Hey, I shouted. Marshall's going to the water. Sergeant Holmes was closest. He sprinted over and tackled Marshall from behind, driving him into the sand. But instead of going down easy, Marshall fought back with a strength I'd never seen from him before. He threw Holmes off like he weighed nothing. She's calling me, Marshall said, his voice flat and strange. The deep mother waits. It took 3 of us to hold him down. His eyes were wild, unfocused. He thrashed and bucked, screaming words that didn't make sense. Let me go! I need to go to her. She's waiting. Then just as suddenly his voice changed. Became deeper, almost gurgling. She's angry now, he said, staring right at me with eyes that looked black in the moonlight. You took one of hers, so she'll take all of you. The deep mother is coming. Marshall's body went rigid, then started to convulse. Foam gathered at the corners of his mouth. She's coming for all of you, he whispered. She's coming up from the deep. Fields knelt beside him. Marshall! Private Marshall, get a hold of yourself! Marshall's eyes cleared for just a second. The real Marshall looked out at us, terrified. Help me, he gasped. I can hear them in my head. Don't let me go in the water, please. Then his eyes rolled back, and he passed out cold. We carried Marshall up the ridge to the bunker as the sun started going down. We tied his hands and feet just in case. No one wanted to say it, but we all knew he might not be Marshall anymore when he woke up. The bunker looked worse in the fading light. Bloodstains on the walls, broken furniture everywhere, but at least it had concrete walls and a roof. Secure all entrances, Fields ordered once we were inside. Use anything you can find. I want every opening blocked except the back tunnel. I grabbed a metal table with Sergeant Holmes and dragged it to the main entrance. We flipped it on its side and jammed it against the door frame. Hill found some empty filing cabinets, and we stacked those too. Think this'll hold them? Hill asked, his voice tight. No idea, I said. We worked fast, piling anything heavy against the windows and side doors. The whole time I kept seeing those things coming out of the water in my head. The way they moved wasn't right, like their joints bent in too many places. Harper, get some light in here, Fields called from the main room. I found an old oil lamp and some matches. The lamp still had fuel, thank God. The yellow light made the blood on the walls look black. Marshall was propped against the far wall. His eyes were open now, but they weren't right. Too wide, too empty. His mouth moved constantly, whispering something I couldn't hear. What's he saying? I asked Holmes. Holmes shook his head. Nothing good. Been muttering about her arrival for the past 10 minutes. I walked closer to Marshall. His lips were cracked and his skin looked grey. She rises, he whispered. The deep mother comes for what is hers. Who's coming, Marshall? I asked, crouching in front of him. His eyes focused on me for a second. She knows you've seen her children. She knows you've seen beneath the waves. I stepped back. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the night air. Moore was still trying to get the radio working in the corner. Nothing but static, he said, frustration clear in his voice. Keep trying, Fields ordered. Outside, fog started rolling in from the ocean. It was thick and white, climbing the ridge like it had a mind of its own. I watched it through a cracked window, moving way faster than fog should. Lieutenant, I called. You might want to see this. Fields joined me at the window. The fog had covered the beach completely and was halfway up the ridge now. We couldn't see our old camp anymore. What the hell? Fields muttered. That's when I heard it. That same 3-beat rhythm I'd noticed in the waves, but now it was in the fog somehow. A whispered pattern that almost sounded like words. You hear that? I asked. Fields nodded slowly. What is it saying? I shook my head. I don't know, but it's definitely saying something. The fog reached the bunker, seeping through the cracks around the windows and doors. It brought a smell with it, salt and rot and something else I couldn't name. The floor trembled beneath us, just a small vibration at first. "Everyone stay calm," Fields said, but his voice wasn't steady. I saw water then, pushing through a crack in the concrete floor. Just a thin trickle at first, but then more cracks appeared. Water seeped in from everywhere, the floor, the walls, even parts of the ceiling. "How is this possible?" Medina asked, backing away from a growing puddle. "We're on high ground." The trembling got stronger, equipment rattled on shelves, the barricades we'd built shook. "Fields to posts," Fields shouted. "Holmes, take the main entrance. Hill, the west window. Medina, east side. Moore, keep working that radio. Harper, with me at the back tunnel." We all moved to our positions. The water on the floor was ankle deep now, cold and murky. The trembling turned into full shaking, like the whole island was having a fit. "What do you think it is, sir?" I asked Fields as we stood watching the dark tunnel that led out the back of the bunker. "I don't know, Harper," he said quietly, "but I don't think it's an earthquake." Marshall's laughter cut through the noise, high and unnatural. "She's here! She's here!" The shaking got so bad I had to grab the wall to stay standing. Then suddenly, it stopped. Complete silence fell. Even the whispers in the fog went quiet. "Everyone okay?" Fields called out. Before anyone could answer, something hit the main entrance. Not like a person hitting it, like a truck. The concrete wall cracked with a sound like thunder. The barricade we'd built collapsed. "Contact front," Holmes yelled, raising his rifle. Another impact hit the east wall where Medina was posted. A spiderweb of cracks spread across the concrete. Water poured through. I ran to the largest crack in the main wall. It was about 2 inches wide now. I pressed my eye against it and looked outside. What I saw made my blood freeze. Through the fog moved something massive, a shape like the statue in the cave but impossibly huge. 20, maybe 30 feet tall. Its skin was covered in scales that caught what little moonlight filtered through the fog. Around it moved smaller figures, humanoid but wrong. Fish-like faces, webbed hands, bodies that bent at impossible angles. And there, right in front of the group, was Leo. His skin was different now, covered in greenish scales that glistened wet in the fog. His eyes were black pools, and his mouth had changed shape, wider than human, but I still recognized him. "Leo?" I whispered. He turned and looked right at me through the crack. His mouth opened in what might have been a smile, showing rows of needle-like teeth. "Harper, get back!" Fields shouted. The wall exploded inward. Chunks of concrete flew everywhere. I was thrown backward, landing hard on my back in the water. Through the dust and debris they came. The fish people, dozens of them, crawling through the opening with unnatural speed. Medina fired his rifle, hitting one in the chest. It shrieked but kept coming. 3 of them grabbed him, their webbed hands wrapping around his arms and throat. "Help!" he screamed as they dragged him toward the hole in the wall. "God, please help me!" Moore tried to run to him but was caught by 2 more creatures. They pulled him down into the water. His screams gurgled as they dragged him out through the hole. "Fall back!" Fields yelled, firing his sidearm at the creatures. The bullets hit but seemed to do nothing. The massive shape outside moved closer to the bunker. I could see it clearly now through the gaping hole in the wall. A giant woman-like figure with scales instead of skin, an elongated head with huge black eyes, and a mouth that opened too wide, revealing rows of teeth like a shark. Fields emptied his pistol at it. The bullets seemed to disappear into its flesh without effect. I scrambled backward through the water, looking for anything that might help. That's when I spotted it. An old fuel canister near some Japanese equipment in the corner. It was rusty but still sealed. An idea hit me. A desperate, probably stupid idea. I splashed through the water and grabbed the canister. It was heavy, still at least half full. "Lieutenant," I shouted, "I need your lighter." Fields looked at me like I was crazy, but tossed me his metal lighter anyway. I caught it one-handed. The massive creature was pushing through the opening now, concrete crumbling around it as it forced its way in. Its eyes found me, and I felt a pressure in my head like something trying to get in. I unscrewed the cap on the fuel canister and started pouring it around the entrance and across the water's surface. The smell of gasoline filled the air. "Everyone out the back tunnel now!" I yelled. Holmes grabbed Hill, who was frozen in place, and pulled him toward the tunnel. Fields backed up slowly, still facing the creatures. The massive entity was halfway inside now, its huge arms reaching for us. Leo and more fish people crawled around its feet coming for us. I waited until the others were at the tunnel entrance, then flicked the lighter. The flame looked tiny in my hand. "See you in hell," I said, and tossed the lighter into the fuel. The whoosh of ignition was immediate. Fire raced across the water's surface and up the walls. The creature screamed, a sound like metal tearing. The giant entity recoiled, its flesh smoking where the flames touched it. I turned and ran for the tunnel, diving through the opening just as the heat became unbearable. Behind me, something exploded. Probably more fuel or ammunition we hadn't seen. The tunnel shook as part of the bunker collapsed. Dust and smoke billowed past us. We kept running, the four of us that were left. Me, Lieutenant Fields, Sergeant Holmes, and Private Hill. We didn't stop until we couldn't hear the screams anymore. I stood on the destroyer's deck watching the island get smaller. The wind felt good on my face after everything we'd been through. We stood there in a line, nobody talking much. I gripped the railing tight, like I was afraid I might float away if I let go. We'd spent hours hiding in the jungle after running from the bunker. Those were the worst hours of my life. We crouched in the thick brush, listening to things moving around us. Things that weren't human. They made sounds I can't really describe. Not animal, not anything I'd ever heard before. We barely breathed, afraid they'd find us. Lieutenant Fields kept us together, signalling with hand motions when we needed to move. Sometimes they got close enough that I could smell them, like dead fish and something else, something older. When dawn came, the sounds faded. The creatures went back underground or into the water, I guess. We waited another hour to be sure, then made our way to the beach. Fields said we needed to signal any ships that might come looking when the second wave didn't arrive. "We need something that burns," Holmes had said, looking around at the jungle. We gathered everything we could find, wood, parts of our camp that hadn't been destroyed, even some fuel we'd salvaged from the bunker. Hill stood watch while the rest of us worked. I kept looking at the water, expecting to see shapes moving beneath the surface. "You think they're still out there?" I'd asked Fields as we piled branches. "Keep working, Harper," was all he said. We'd almost given up hope when Hill spotted it. A ship on the horizon. We lit our signal fires right away. Black smoke rose into the clear blue sky. I prayed they'd see it. I prayed harder than I ever had in my life. Now we were safe on the destroyer, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, like we hadn't really escaped at all. Lieutenant Fields was talking to the ship's captain, a tall guy with a weathered face. I stood close enough to hear them. "Lost most of our unit to enemy action, sir," Fields was saying. His voice sounded normal, professional, like he was reporting standard combat losses. "Japanese resistance was heavier than expected?" the captain asked, writing something in a notebook. "Yes, sir. They had hidden positions we didn't anticipate." I caught Fields' eye for just a second. His look was clear. "Keep your mouth shut. Don't say a word about what really happened." I nodded slightly. Who would believe us anyway? Holmes and Hill stood nearby, both looking like they'd aged 10 years. Hill's hands were shaking as he lit a cigarette. Holmes just stared at the island, his face blank. "The island's scheduled for bombing," the captain said, checking his watch. "Naval air support should be there any minute." Fields nodded. "Good." A sailor brought us coffee in metal cups. I took mine and thanked him, but I couldn't drink it. My stomach was in knots. I kept seeing those things in the bunker. I kept hearing Marshall's voice talking about the deep mother. I kept thinking about Leo, changed into something that wasn't human anymore. "You okay, Harper?" Holmes asked, standing next to me. "Yeah," I lied. "Just tired." "Me too." We both knew we weren't just tired. We'd seen things that didn't make sense, things that shouldn't exist, but we didn't talk about it. I heard the planes before I saw them. The low drone of engines made me look up. 3 bombers flew overhead, heading toward the island. They looked small from this distance, like toys. "There they go," Hill said, joining us at the railing. We watched in silence as the planes reached the island. Then came the explosions. Even from this distance, we could see them tear across the small piece of land. Fire bloomed where the bombs hit. The jungle burned. More planes came, dropping more bombs. They hit the ridge where the bunker had been. They hit the beach where we'd first landed. They hit everything. I should have felt relief. Maybe I did. A little. But mostly I felt dread. Deep down, I didn't think bombs could destroy what lived in that place. It was too old, too powerful. The things we'd seen, the shapes in the water, They'd been there long before us, long before anyone. Smoke billowed from the island, thick and black against the blue sky. The ocean around us was calm, almost peaceful. Nothing moved beneath the surface, not that I could see anyway. But when I closed my eyes, I could still hear them, those whispers that came with the waves. 3 beats, like a pattern, like words in a language too old to understand. I opened my eyes fast. Lieutenant Fields was looking at me, his face tight with worry. "It's over, Harper," he said quietly. "We made it out." I nodded, but I didn't believe him. Neither did he. The destroyer started turning away from the island. We were heading back to Pearl Harbor, the captain said. We'd get medical attention there. We'd give our reports. We'd try to move on. The island disappeared from view, but I kept staring at the horizon. The whispers followed me even as we turned away. They were in my head now, and I didn't think they'd ever leave. I knew something then, with terrible certainty. Those things, whatever they were patient. They'd waited centuries before we came. They could wait centuries more. The bombs might have destroyed the island, but the ocean was vast and deep. And whatever lived in those depths was ancient beyond understanding. The whispers told me so. They told me they'd be waiting.